If you've ever looked at the answer choices on the SAT reading practice test and thought, all these answer choices look correct, you are my people. I have helped thousands of students understand the SAT better and improve their scores. So go ahead, grab practice test 4 as I go through a complete walkthrough on every single one of the questions in module 1 and module 2. If you have any questions for me, leave them down in the comments. I read all the comments and I will happily answer you. This is practice test 4, module 1. Every practice test on the SAT starts off with vocabulary questions. So our first vocabulary question here, number 1, talks about the spacecraft Osiris Rex briefly made contact with the asteroid, doesn't really matter the name of it, in 2020. NASA scientist Daniela reports that despite having the unexpected obstacle of a surface mostly covered in boulders, but despite that obstacle, they were still successfully able to blank a sample of surface, gathering pieces to bring it back to Earth. So which word here is a synonym with gathering? Collected. So B is my answer. Number 2, still vocabulary, and you can tell because the question stem is the same for every single one of these vocabulary questions. Research conducted by planetary scientist Katrina suggests that the moon's surface may not accurately what? Early impact events. When the moon was still forming, its surface was softer and asteroid or meteoroid impacts would have left less of an impression. Thus, evidence of early impacts may no longer be present. So, what did accurately blank reflect? Number 3, handedness. A preferential use of either the right or left hand typically is easy to observe in humans. Because this trait is present but less something in many other animals, animal behavior researchers often employ tasks specifically designed to reveal individual animals' preferences for a certain hand or paw. So I wonder if they can't tell as easily. That would mean it would be less recognizable. Number 4, still doing vocabulary. It is by no means what? To recognize the influence of Dutch painter, I'll just call him HB, on Ollie's paintings. Indeed, Ollie's himself cites Bosch as an inspiration. However, so notice they'll use the word but, however, yet, any one of those kind of words indicates a shift or a change. Some scholars have suggested that the ancient Mesopotamian poem, epic, may have had a far greater impact on Bannister's work. So the only thing that would make sense here is it is by no means what? By no means unimportant. They're saying, we're still saying it's important. And if you look at the words sometimes, if you're not sure, but you look at the connotation, substantial, satisfying, appropriate, those are all positive connotation. Unimportant is the only one that's a negative connotation. And it says here, it is by no means unimportant. So that sometimes that helps to look at the connotation of the words that they're giving you to choose from. Now, when I get to number 5, I see that my question stem has changed. It's no longer asking for the correct word. We've now moved on to reading comprehension. That always comes next after vocabulary on all the modules, and it'll be that way on the actual test. So I'm going to look at my question first. I want to read what it is that I'm looking for before I look at my passage. Which choice best states the main purpose of the text? So I know I'm looking for the main purpose here when I'm reading this text. Now, text where it has kind of like a little introductory thing up here, I like to read it just so I see if it gives me any kind of sense of story, helps me with characters, any background information that can help me with my passage. So the following text is adapted from the short story from 1912. This is the part I probably want to pay attention to. An elderly shop owner is looking at a picture that he recently acquired and hopes to sell. So that gives me a little bit of background information on who the main character is and what's happening. Then I would just go ahead and read it. It did seem the picture failed to fit in with the rest of the shop. So the picture failed to fit in. A persuasive young fellow who claimed he was closing out his stock let the old man have it for what he called a song. Now, a song here means a really good deal. Cheap. He let him have it for a great deal. It was only a little out of the way store which subsisted chiefly on the framing of pictures. So he basically made his money on framing pictures, not so much selling them. The old man looked around at his view of the city, his pictures of cats and dogs, his flaming bits of landscape. Don't belong in here, he fumed. Okay, when I see fumed, I know he was probably feeling angry at that time. And yet, here's where there's a shift. The old man was secretly proud of his acquisition. So he's proud of this new picture. There was a hidden dignity in his scowling as he shuffled about, pondering the least ridiculous place for the picture. So I know he was fuming, but he was also proud. If I look here at my answer choices, the main purpose is it to reveal the shop owner's conflicted feelings about the new picture. Well, conflicted feelings definitely happened. He was fuming and said don't belong here, but then again he was secretly proud and had a little bit of hidden dignity. So I would feel confident choosing A as my answer. I could go ahead and read B, C, and D to see just to make sure, but if you're confident in your answer, you don't have to keep looking at the rest. B, to convey the shop owner's resentment of the person. Nothing said he resented the person that he got the picture from. Sometimes one word like resentment can make the whole answer incorrect. C, to describe the items that the shop owner most highly prizes. It did describe some of his other pictures in the shop, like the cats and the dogs, but nothing said that that was what he most highly prizes. So that makes C incorrect. D, to explain differences between the new picture and other pictures in the shop. It briefly described that this picture didn't belong, but that's not the main purpose. So I feel confident with my answer being A. Number 6. Again, we're still on reading comprehension, so I want to look at the question first. Which choice best describes the overall structure of the text? I'm going to go ahead and look at the text. Again, I want to see if there's anything here that gives me any kind of background information. The following text is from the 1923 poem Black Finger by Angelina Weld Grimke, a Black American writer. A cypress is a type of evergreen tree. If they tell you something like that, that's information that you probably want to pay attention to and note as you're reading. I have just seen a most beautiful thing. Slim and still against a gold sky, a straight black cypress, and we know from the beginning there that that means it's a tree. Sensitive, exquisite, a black finger pointing upwards. It's this big tree. It's like pointing upwards. Why, beautiful still finger, are you black? And why are you pointing upwards? So she's questioning it. So if I look to see what the structure is, if I look at A, the speaker assesses a natural phenomenon, then questions the accuracy of her assessment. She doesn't question her accuracy. So B, the speaker describes a distinctive sight in nature. Yeah, it's a very distinctive cypress tree that's pointing up straight like a finger. Then ponders what meaning to attribute to that sight. She's saying why. So yeah, she's pondering it. So both of those meet what I'm looking for. I think that's the structure of this text. I would feel confident with B. I could look at C and D just to be sure. C, the speaker presents an outdoor scene, then considers a human behavior occurring within that scene. While it does refer to the tree as a finger, it's not looking at the human behavior and figuring out how it occurs within the scene. D, the speaker examines her surroundings and speculates about their influence on her emotional state. This is not about her emotional state, so we can be confident that we were correct when we selected B. Number 7 is still reading comprehension, so I'm going to go ahead and pay attention to my question first. What choice best describes the overall structure of the text? So just like the previous question, we're looking for the structure of the text. And I would go ahead and just read up here. Following text is from Walt Whitman's 1860 poem, Calamus 24. That doesn't really tell me anything other than the fact that it was written in 1860, so it's old. But other than that, doesn't give me much information. I hear, and it's written in capitals, so probably want to pay attention to that. It is charged against me that I seek to destroy institutions. So it's something that they're charging against him. But remember, pay attention to those words. They indicate a shift. Really, I am neither for nor against institutions. What indeed have I in common with them, or what with the destruction of them? Only I will establish in the Manhattan, which is Manhattan, and in every city of these states, inland and seaboard, and in the fields and woods, and above every keel ship, little or large, that dents the water, without edifices or rules or trustees or any argument, the institution of the dear love of comrades. We can see here that if I look at my answer choices, the speaker questions an increasingly prevalent attitude, then summarizes his worldview. He's not questioning an increasing prevalent attitude. The speaker regrets his isolation from others, then predicts a profound change in society. There's nothing to indicate that he has regrets there. C, the speaker concedes his personal shortcomings. Concedes is kind of like giving in, giving over, saying, yeah, you're right, I was wrong. He didn't do that. D, the speaker addresses a criticism leveled against him. Yeah, there was a criticism that was leveled against him. He says, I hear that people are saying I want to destroy institutions. That's a criticism. Then he announces a grand ambition of his. Okay, yep, here it is, his grand ambition. So confident that D is the correct answer. Number 8, reading comprehension. I still want to look at my question here. Which choice best describes the function of the third sentence in the overall structure of the text? Every time I've seen a certain sentence asked about in the structure of a text, you don't have to count the sentences. They always underline it as far as I've seen. And sometimes they'll say to you, which choice best describes the function of the underlined sentence in the overall structure of the text. I've seen that even more than I've seen where it says third sentence. So we're looking at the underlined sentence. What specifically is the function of this sentence in the overall structure of the text? So I need to kind of read the text and figure out what the overall structure is, and then determine what that sentence does, how it fits in there. The mimosa tree evolved in East Asia, where the beetle, and this is a scientific name written in italics, I don't really know how to say it, I'll just say the beetle, preys on its seeds. In 1785, mimosa trees were introduced to North America, far from any of those beetles. So the trees came here 300 years ago, about that, and none of those beetles were here. They were far away from them. But evolutionary links between predators and their prey can persist across centuries and continents. Okay, it's giving me, and again, but indicates a shift. Around 2001, so over 200 years later, the beetle was introduced in southeastern North America, near where botanist Shumi Chang and colleagues had been monitoring mimosa trees. Within a year, 93% of the trees had been attacked by the beetles. So these beetles, it was years later and really far away from where they originated. They took over, basically. So when I look back at the sentence that I'm figuring out its function, it's giving me a generalization. Evolutionary links between predators and their prey can persist across centuries. We said it was like over 200 years, and continents from East Asia to North America. So if I look at my answer choices, A says it states the hypothesis that Chang and colleagues had set out to investigate using the mimosa trees and the beetle. That underlined portion does not state the hypothesis, and we're just looking at what does that underlined portion do. B, it presents a generalization, yep, it sure did, that is exemplified by the discussion of the mimosa trees and the beetle. It gave us a generalization of how it could travel far evolutionary links, and it could travel over many centuries and continents, and that's what happened here. So I would feel confident with B. If I wanted to check C and D to be sure, let's see, C, it offers an alternative explanation for the findings. That sentence is underlined, does not do that. It provides context that clarifies why the species mentioned spread to new locations. No, it doesn't tell us why. It just gives us a generalization that tells us that sometimes that happens. So B is definitely our answer. Number 9 is still reading comprehension. It is one of the ones that has 2 texts. And I've seen pretty much on every practice test that they have at least one question where you're comparing 2 texts. And I think you can expect about one of these questions per module on the test. And I want to go ahead and read the question. Based on the text, how would Graeber and Wengrow, text 2, most likely respond to the conventional wisdom presented in text 1? So I'm looking at how the people in, let's see, Graeber and Wengrow, that's what it said here, Graeber and Wengrow, text 2, how would they respond to the conventional wisdom presented in the first text? Well, what is the conventional wisdom presented in the first text is the first thing I need to figure out. And hey, it starts off with conventional wisdom right away. Long held that human social systems evolved in stages. So that's the conventional wisdom, that these human social systems evolved in stages, beginning with hunter-gatherers forming small bands of members with roughly equal status. Then the shift to agriculture about 12,000 years ago sparked population growth that led to the emergence of groups with hierarchical structures, associations of clans first, then chiefdoms, and finally bureaucratic states. So that's their take on it. This is what the conventional wisdom is, that social systems evolved over time. So if I look at text 2 in a 2021 book, Graeber and Wengrow maintain that humans have always been socially flexible, alternately forming systems based on hierarchy and collective ones with decentralized leadership. The authors point to evidence as far back as 50,000 50,000 years ago, that some hunter-gatherers adjusted their social structure seasonally, and at times dispersing in small groups but also assembling into communities that included esteemed individuals. So when we look at text 1, they're saying that this kind of happened on a linear path, and text 2, they're saying that it evolved over the seasons. You could have the social groups changing even 50,000 years ago. So would it be by conceding the importance of hierarchical systems? Okay, they're not conceding anything, and it's not about the importance of the hierarchical systems. B, by disputing the idea, yeah, they're disputing it, that developments in social structures have followed a linear progression through distinct stages. That's exactly what happened, because in text 1, they're saying it was a linear progression of the social systems. And these anthropologists in text 2 were saying that no, it kind of went back and forth. So B has to be my answer. If I want to check C and D, I can. C, by acknowledging that hierarchical roles likely weren't part of a social systems before the rise of agriculture. That's not true. It said as far as 50,000 years ago. By challenging the assumption that groupings of hunter-gatherers were among the earliest forms of social structure. They didn't challenge that. They just said that it changed seasonally. So yeah, we're definitely correct with B. Number 10. Again, reading comprehension. Always want to look at the question. Which choice best states the main idea of the text? So I'm looking for the main idea here. Again, I want to go up here and just kind of read, get a little bit of background knowledge. This following text is adapted from Frances Hodgson Burnett's 1911 novel, The Secret Garden. Mary, a young girl, recently found an overgrown hidden garden. That's the background information that they're giving you. You want to pay attention to that because it might help you. So now I know when Mary was an odd, determined little person, and now she had something interesting to be determined about. She was very much absorbed, indeed. So she's like really into this. She worked and dug and pulled up weeds steadily, only becoming more pleased with her work every hour instead of tiring of it. So she found this overgrown hidden garden. We know that from up here. And she is just so absorbed in it, and she's pulling weeds and digging, and she's becoming more pleased with every hour that she works. It seemed to her like a fascinating sort of play. So her work seemed like play to her. So if I look at my answer choices, A, it says Mary hides in the garden to avoid doing her chores. Nothing said that she was hiding, and nothing said she was avoiding her chores. B, Mary is getting bored with pulling up so many weeds in the garden. That's exactly opposite of what it said. It says she became more pleased. So bored is definitely not correct. C, Mary is clearing out the garden to create a space to play. Sometimes students will look and just say, oh, hey, I see sort of play. But no, she's not clearing out a place to play. She's already playing. She's considering her work of clearing it out as play. D, Mary feels very satisfied when she's taking care of the garden. Much absorbed, more pleased, play. Yes, she is very satisfied. So D is definitely my answer for number 10. Number 11, again, still reading comprehension. I can tell by my question stem, so I want to read that. It says, based on the text, in what way is the human mind like a flower? So I'm going to go ahead and look up here, and it tells me the following text is based on this 1909 poem, based on the work of Mark Antonius. That doesn't really tell me anything other than it was a poem about 100 years ago or more. As a fragile and lovely flower unfolds its gleaming foliage on the breast of the fostering earth, if the dew and the rain draw it forth. Okay, so fragile, lovely flower, it unfolds as long as it has the dew and the rain. You're helping it out. So doth my tender mind flourish, if it be fed with sweet dew of fostering spirit. So remember, we're wondering, what way is the human mind like a flower? If it's fed, it will bloom. Lacking this, it beginneth straightway to languish, even as a floweret born upon dry earth, if the dew and the rain tend it not. A, it becomes increasingly vigorous with the passage of time. No, it does not say anything about anything becoming increasingly vigorous. It draws strength from changes in the weather. Does it really draw strength from changes in the weather? I'm not sure. I mean, that might have something to do with the flower, but does that really have anything to do with the human mind? C, it requires proper nourishment in order to thrive. Absolutely. Talks about the nourishment that the flower needs, and then how the human mind needs the nourishment of spirit. D, it perseveres despite challenging circumstances. It does not talk about that, so definitely C is our answer. Number 12, still reading comprehension. Which choice best states the main idea of the text? So I know I just need to know what's the main idea here. If I look here, let's see is there anything that gives me background knowledge? It says the following text is adapted from Jack London's 1903 novel, The Call of the Wild. Buck is a sled dog living with John Thornton in Yukon, Canada. So yeah, that gives me some information I might want to pay attention to. Thornton alone held Buck. The rest of mankind was as nothing. Chance travelers might praise or pet him, but he was cold under it all. And from a too demonstrative man, he would get up and walk away. When Thornton's partners, Hans and Pete, arrived on the long-expected raft, Buck refused to notice them, till he learned that they were close to Thornton. After that, he tolerated them in a passive sort of way, accepting favors from them as though he favored them by accepting. Buck, that's our sled dog, has become, I'm looking at A now, has become less social since he began living with Thornton. That's the opposite of what's going on here. B, Buck mistrusts humans and does his best to avoid them. Kind of mistrusts them a little bit, but it doesn't say anything about him doing his best to avoid them. C, Buck has been especially well liked by most of Thornton's friends. It doesn't really tell us anything about how the friends feel about Buck, only about how Buck feels about the people. D, Buck holds Thornton in a higher regard than any other person. Absolutely. Number 13. This is a reading comprehension question that involves a graph or chart. I think you'll see 2 to 3 graph or chart questions per module on the SAT. Graph and chart questions can be tricky because the information in the graph or chart might be correct, but it might not be what the question's asking you. So you might need to just look at the graph or chart, and that might give you all the information you need, or you might have to pay really close attention to what they're talking about in the passage to figure out the answer. So let's see with this one. It says, which choice most effectively uses data from the graph to complete the text? Let me see what the text says. I might just start here. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, in 2016, California had between 26 and 2,800. Here's my California. Yep, between 26 and 28. Washington had between 600 and 800. Let me go to Washington. It had between 600 and 800. So I would feel like that's probably my answer, but let me just keep looking. New York had fewer than 800. If I go to New York, oh, nope, they had 1,000, so that's incorrect. C, Wisconsin and Iowa. Here's Wisconsin and Iowa. Each had between 1,200 and 1,400. Wisconsin between 12 and 14, but Iowa, nope. So since Iowa did not, that makes that incorrect. Pennsylvania had more than 1,200 organic farms. If I look at Pennsylvania, nope, they did not have more than 1,200, so that makes that incorrect. So A is my answer. This instance, we only needed to look at the graph. We didn't need to read all of this information, and that happens on some of these questions, but on some of these questions, you do need to read all the information, and sometimes the information in the passage can be even more important than the actual numbers in the graph. So we'll look at that on future questions. Looking at number 14, which is also still reading comprehension. Which finding, if true, would most directly support Gomez's and her team's hypothesis? I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. All right, so which one would most directly support their hypothesis? I need to know what is their hypothesis. Biologist Valentina Gomez and her team have investigated 2 subspecies of the fork-tailed flycatcher bird that live in the same region in Colombia. But one subspecies migrates south for part of the year and the other doesn't. The researchers found that due to the slight difference in feather shape, the feathers of the migratory fork-tailed flycatcher males make a sound during flight that is higher pitched than made by the feathers of the migratory males. The researchers hypothesized, remember we want to know what is their hypothesis, that the fork-tailed flycatcher females are attracted to the specific sound made by the males of their own subspecies, and that over time, the female's preference will drive further genetic and anatomical divergence between the subspecies. If I look at A, it says the feathers located on the wings of the migratory fork-tailed flycatchers have a narrower shape than those of the non-migratory birds, which allows them to fly long distances. That does not support, remember we're looking to support the hypothesis, that does not support the hypothesis. B, over several generations, the sound, now we're looking at the sound, made by the feathers of the migratory male fork-tailed flycatchers grows progressively higher pitched relative to that made by the feathers of non-migratory males. Yeah, that supports their hypothesis. It's pretty much what they said. So I would feel confident with B being my answer. If I look at C, it says fork-tailed flycatchers communicate different messages to each other depending on whether their feathers create high-pitched or low-pitched sounds. That doesn't support the hypothesis. The breeding habits of the migratory and non-migratory fork-tailed flycatchers remain generally the same over several generations, that's not supporting the hypothesis. So on questions like that, you need to make sure that your answer is supporting the hypothesis. Okay, question number 15 is another chart or graph question. Let's see, which choice most effectively uses data from the table to complete the example? So if we're looking here at this example, it says, for example, whereas the average ablation rate for iron from AST dust is 28, the average rate for blank iron from SPC dust is 20%. That checks out. Sodium from OCC dust is 100%. Sodium, OCC 100, that checks out. Iron from HTC dust is 90. Iron 90, that checks out. Sodium from AST is 75. Sodium, AST 75, that checks out. So this is one of those questions where you can't just use the graph, because all of these are correct as far as the numbers. Where our other question, we had none of the answer choices matched as far as the numbers. This one, they all match as far as the numbers. So we need to look at the passage and really figure out, what are we talking about here? So Earth's atmosphere is bombarded by cosmic dust originating from several sources. Short period comets, SPCs, particles from the asteroid belt, ASTs, Halley-type comets, HTCs, and Oort cloud comets, OCCs. Some of the dust material vaporizes in the atmosphere in a process called ablation. So that's what they're talking about. And the faster the particles move, the higher the rate of ablation. Astrophysicist Juan Diego led a team that calculated average ablation rates for elements in the dust, such as iron and potassium, and showed that material in slower moving SPC or AST dust has a lower rate than some material in faster moving HTC or OCC dust. For example, so this is where they're giving us an example, is that the material in slower moving SPC has a lower rate than the faster moving HTC or OCC. So here, since they're talking about, for example, iron, we need to look at iron because we're going to compare iron to iron. So I can eliminate B because that's talking about sodium, and I can eliminate D because that's talking about sodium. It's talking about the ablation rate for iron, and the AST is 28%. Okay, so the AST, 28% for iron. That's a slower moving one. Let's see, SPC is also slower moving. So we don't want to compare slower moving to slower moving. We want to compare it to the faster moving one. So the faster moving, so the HTC at 90%, that's going to be our answer. So you can see that some of these graph and chart questions are more complex than others. But if you look at the passage, when you see that, okay, all the information's correct, but I need to go through and read the passage, you'll be able to arrive at the correct answer. So number 16, again, still on reading comprehension, I'm going to look at my question. Which quotation from the interviews best illustrates the journalist's claim? So you want to figure out what is the journalist's claim, and then you want to go through and read these quotations and figure out which one best illustrates the claim. So if I look here, art collectives like the United States and Vietnam-based collective, the Propeller Group, or Cuba's Lost, I don't know how to say that, are groups of artists who agree to work together. So groups of artists who agree to work together, perhaps for stylistic reasons or to advance certain shared political ideals, or to help mitigate the cost of supplies and studio space. So regardless, so for whatever reason that they decide to work together, art collectives usually involve some collaboration among the artists. Based on a recent series of interviews with various art collectives, an arts journalist claims, okay, we want to look at the journalist's claim, that this can be difficult for artists who are often used to having sole control over their work. All we're looking for here is why would the journalist claim that the artists have a hard time working together be true? Which one of these quotes supports that? So if I look at quote A, the first collective I joined included many amazingly talented artists, and we enjoyed each other's company. But because we had a hard time sharing credit and responsibility for our work, the collective didn't last. That supports the idea that they had a hard time working together because they're so used to working alone. So I feel like A is my answer. I could look at B. We work together, but that doesn't mean that individual projects are equally the work of all of us. Many of our projects are primarily the responsibility of whoever originally proposed the work to the group. That doesn't express the difficulty of them working together. C, having worked as a member of a collective for several years, it's sometimes hard to recall what it was like to work alone. without the collective support, but that support encourages my individual expression rather than limits it. So this one is in favor of working as a group. So that's not what we're talking about. D, sometimes an artist from outside the collective will choose to collaborate with us on a project, but all of those projects fit within the larger themes of the work of the collective does on its own. Again, not talking about the individual. So A is definitely our answer. Number 17, we have another chart graph kind of question here. Again, we might be able to just use the graph, or we might have to look a little bit further into the information to see what we need for an answer. And it says, which choice most effectively uses data from the table to complete the statement? Well, what is the statement? After several weeks, the student measured the plant's average mass and was surprised to discover something. So I have to figure out what's going on that would have led the student to be surprised by what they discovered. So if I look here, effects, look at the title of, I don't know how to say that word. I'm just going to call it M fungi on 3 plant species. M fungi in soil, I'm going to come here and start reading, benefits many plants, substantially increasing the mass of some. A student conducted an experiment to illustrate this effect. The student chose 3 plant species for experiment, including 2 that are M hosts. So, okay, we see that corn and marigold are M hosts. Those are species that are known to benefit from the M fungi. And 1 non-M species, the broccoli, that's not a host. A species that does not benefit from and may even be harmed by the M fungi. The student then grew several plants from each species, both in soil containing M fungi, and in the soil that had been treated to kill M and other fungi. So after several weeks, what was he surprised to discover? If I look at my answer choices, A, the broccoli grown in soil containing M fungi had a slightly higher average mass than broccoli grown in soil that had been treated to kill M fungi. So if we look at average mass containing M fungi, and then here's the one that it was killed the M fungi. Yeah, the broccoli did have a higher mass than with the M fungi than the one without. And that would be surprising because it's not a host for it. They thought it would damage it, but it didn't damage it. It actually increased its size. So we're looking for what was a surprise for the student. A makes sense. B, corn grown in soil containing M fungi had a higher average mass than broccoli grown in soil containing M fungi. Well, yeah, the corn did have a higher mass than the broccoli, but that shouldn't be a surprise because it is a host for that. C, marigolds grown in soil containing M fungi had a much higher mass than marigolds grown in soil that had been treated to kill the fungi. Again, that's true, but that would not be surprising. D, corn had the highest average mass of all 3 species grown in soil that had been treated to kill the fungi. No, that's not true. So, yeah. A is definitely my answer. Number 18, reading comprehension. Which choice most logically completes the text? Seems like there's usually 1 to 3 questions at the end of the reading comprehension questions that ask you which choice most logically completes the text. For these questions, I would go ahead and read the text. The passage isn't that long, and figure out which one of those just makes sense. So I'll start reading here. Several artworks found among the ruins of the ancient Roman city of Pompeii depict a female figure fishing with a Cupid nearby. Some scholars have asserted the figure is the goddess Venus, since she is known to have been linked with Cupids in Roman culture. But there's some kind of shift. University of Leicester archaeologist Carla Brain suggests that Cupids may have also been associated with fishing generally. The fact that a Cupid is shown near the female figure, therefore, well, that doesn't mean it was necessarily Venus. That's kind of what I'm thinking in my head, and then I'm going to look down at my answer choices. Is not conclusive evidence that the figure is Venus. That's kind of how I would have finished that sentence anyway in my head, so I would feel confident with A. B suggests that Venus was often depicted fishing. That's not what they're saying. C eliminates the possibility that the figure is Venus. That's not true. It could be, but it's not conclusive that it is. And D would be difficult to account for if the figure is not Venus. That's not true either. Number 19 on practice test 4 is the first grammar question. And right away when I look at the answer choices, I can see that they have apostrophes and they have plural. So I know that they are testing me on possessive and plurals. So I'll go ahead and read this. Literary agents estimate that more than half of all nonfiction books credited to a celebrity or other public figure are in fact written by ghostwriters, professional authors who are paid to write other people's stories. but whose names never appear on book covers. Okay, it's plural stories, other people's stories. So right away, I know it needs to be IES because there's multiple stories. So I'm between A and C. Now it's people's stories. The stories belong to the people. So I need that apostrophe to show the possession. So my answer is A. Number 20. When I'm doing the grammar questions, I don't read the question stem every time. Which choice completes the text so that it conforms to the conventions of standard English? As long as the question is about the conventions of standard English, you know you're doing these types of questions and they all come in a row right after the reading comprehension. So I don't need to sit there and read my question every time. I'm going to look at my answer choices real quick, and I see that they are all versions of the verb survive or survived. Some of them are past tense. This is all about verb tense. So I'd just start reading. Like other amphibians, the wood frog, I don't need to read the part that's italicized. That's just a scientific name. Is unable to generate its own heat. So during periods of sub-freezing temperatures, it blank by producing large amounts of glucose. Okay, well, during this time, during periods of sub-freezing temperatures, it's unable to generate its own heat. That's written in present tense, so I want to see what else is present tense, and it is D, survives. That's present tense. Number 21. I would look here at the answer choices first, and I see a lot of dashes, and I can see that obviously they're testing me on what I know about dashes. So when I'm looking at this, I would probably just start with the second sentence. I don't need to read the first sentence, so I would start right here with the defying. Defying all odds, Rudolph didn't just walk, she ran fast. The summer, okay, hold on. During, so I'm going to need to have the word during. So defying, I'm going to go back here, read this again. Defying all odds, Rudolph didn't just walk, she ran fast. During the 1960 Summer Olympics in Rome, okay, right away, I noticed that she didn't just walk, she ran. And they're trying to really emphasize how did she run? She ran fast. And then it starts with during, it begins a new sentence. So it has to be D. I wouldn't even read the rest of that paragraph. Number 22. Number 22, still working on grammar. I would look here. These are just verb tenses. So I don't need to read the entire thing. I don't really need to understand the whole passage. I would probably start with the sentence that has my blank in it, which is interestingly, the triangle representing the mountain itself, blank among the few defined figures in her paintings. The triangle representing the mountain itself, what? Are among, well, it's singular, so I can eliminate are. Have, were. My only verb here that is singular is. So it has to be D. And you could see that I didn't need to waste time reading any of this portion of the passage. So we're on the reading section where you may have to spend extra time reading passages, looking at the graphs and charts and really digging in. You can save time when you get to these grammar questions. And on the SAT, you can go back and forth. So you could like flag an answer in a reading section, and then you might not want to do those yet. You might want to come hit all your grammar questions first because they are so quick, and then go back to the reading comprehension questions. It's totally up to you, but that's just something that works for some of my students. So I'm going to look again at my answer choices, and I see sampler later. Every one of these is sampler or sampler later. Start here in 2004. Watt sewed strips of blankets together to craft a 10 by 13 inch sampler. Later in 2014, she arranged, okay, do I need the word later there? Not really. In 2014, she arranged folded blankets into 2 large stacks and then cast them in bronze, creating 2 curving 18-foot tall blue bronze pillars. So I have 2 independent clauses. I have 2 complete sentences. In 2004, Watt sewed strips of blankets together to craft a 10 by 13 inch sampler. That's where my sentence ends. I don't want later. In 2014, because that would be redundant, I already know 2014 is later than 2004. In 2014, she arranged folded blankets. Okay, so I need to have something that ends. Which one of these indicates an end? Which boundary? Semicolon. That's the same as a period. So that's the only one that can work for 23. If I did a comma, that would be create a comma splice. I can't just connect 2 independent clauses with a comma without a fanboy word after it. Number 24, I'm going to look here. Okay, I see that there are my answer choices look like it's, okay, this is Julian synthesized in 1935. In 1935, Julian Julian's 1935 synthesis, the alkaloid synthesized by Julian in 1935. Okay, so there's some variation of Julian synthesizing an alkaloid in 1935. Whenever they have longer answer choices like this, they're testing you on the subject modifier. So what that means is I need to figure out who or what is the subject of this sentence that I'm looking at first. And that is going to tell me exactly what needs to come in this blank. If I look here, named in 1999 as one of the greatest achievements by a U.S. chemist in the past 100 years. Okay, what is the achievement? Julian, he is not the achievement. In 1935, Julian synthesized the alkaloid. If I'm looking at that, that's starting a new sentence. Julian's 1935 synthesis of the alkaloid, don't know how to say this word. Okay, so his synthesis of the alkaloid is the greatest achievement. So what is our subject? Is the synthesis of the alkaloid. So C is my answer. Number 25. I noticed that all of my words are the same species, both native and non-native. What changes is I have a comma as my boundary marks on A. On B, I have a comma and then a semicolon. On C, I have a semicolon and then a comma. D, I have nothing after the word species and a comma after the word non-native. So I'm going to look up here in this passage to figure out which punctuation mark I need. The Arctic Alpine Botanic Garden in Norway and the Jardim Botanico of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil are two of many botanical gardens around the world dedicated to growing diverse plant species, both native and non-native. That's where I need to have my semicolon. I can continue to read here, and it says, dedicated to growing diverse plant species, both native and non-native, fostering scientific research, and I notice that there's a semicolon there. This is one of the other way that we would use a semicolon in a complex series. So there's 2 times that you're going to be tested on a semicolon. On the SAT, one of them is like we did here in number 23, where your semicolon equals a period. And then here, where this semicolon comes in a complex series. Number 26 is still testing you on the conventions of standard English. I see that the words single-handedly and however are consistent throughout all 4 answer choices. What's different is my comma, semicolon. There's a use of a semicolon and a comma. Here there's a use of 2 commas, and here there is no punctuation. So I need to figure out which one makes the most sense in this passage. If I start with, I'm just going to say O because I don't know how to say that name. O doesn't make such decisions single-handedly. However, all historical destinations must be approved by a group of 9 other experts from the field of architecture, archaeology, history, and Hawaiian culture. Choice A uses a comma to separate the supplementary adverb however from the preceding main clause, and it uses the semicolon to join it to the next main clause that starts with all historical designations. So A is the correct use of a comma and semicolon, so A is my answer. Number 27, I noticed that my question stem changes here. It's asking me about transitions. That means I'm done with this conventions of standard English grammar questions, and now I've moved on to the transition questions. 27, I need to figure out which one of these words makes sense in connecting the 2 sentences where there's on either side of this blank. That's basically what you're doing on the transition questions. So if I look here in 1968, U.S. Congressman John Conyers introduced a bill to establish a national holiday in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The bill didn't make it to a vote, but Conyers was determined. Okay, so it didn't make it to vote, but he was determined. He teamed up with Shirley Chisholm, the first Black woman to be elected to Congress, and they resubmitted the bill every session for the next 15 years. Blank in 1983, the bill passed. So they did something in 1968 all the way to 1983, and then finally it passed. That's how I feel when I read that. And if I look at my answer choices, finally is one of my answer choices. So C is the correct answer. It's logically signaling that the bill passed after many attempts from 1968 to 1983. Question 28 is another transition question, and we're looking to see how this sentence and the next sentence, what word do I want here to connect these 2 sentences? What transition makes the most sense? It says geoscientists have long considered Hawaii's Mauna Loa volcano to be Earth's largest shield volcano by volume, measuring approximately 74,000 cubic kilometers. Blank, according to a 2020 study by local geoscientist Michael Garcia, Hawaii's P Shield volcano is significantly larger. Okay, so this one was thought to be Earth's largest shield volcano for many years, but they realized in 2020 this other one is, because it's 148,000 cubic kilometers. So I naturally put the word but in there when I was talking about it. Which one of these words? It means the same thing as but, however. So D is my answer. Number 29, again, transition. I'm looking for how the sentence up here and this part down here, how they're connected. What word do I want to put on that blank line that would make logical sense? Samuel Coleridge Taylor was a prominent classical music composer from England who toured the U.S. 3 times in the early 1900s. The child of a West African father and an English mother, Coleridge Taylor emphasized his mixed race ancestry. For example, now they're giving us an example, he referred to himself as Anglo-African. Blank, he incorporated the sounds of traditional African music into his classical music compositions. In addition, or if I was thinking, okay, well, additionally, he also does this. So in addition, it logically signals that the detail in the sentence adds to the information, this information in the previous sentence. So since we're adding to it, A in addition is our answer. Number 30 is our last transition question, and we're figuring out how the part before the blank matches or connects to the part after the blank. Which transition word connects those two portions? If I go ahead and start reading, in 2019, researcher Patricia Gonzalez and food historian, I'm just going to say NN, prepared a stew from a 4,000-year-old recipe found on a Mesopotamian clay tablet. When they tasted the dish, known as unwinding, they found that it had a mild taste and inspired a sense of calm. Blank, the researchers, knowing that dishes were sometimes named after their intended effects, theorized that the dish's name unwinding referred to its function to help ancient diners relax. So I'm looking for which one of these. Therefore, alternately, nevertheless, likewise. And the answer, therefore, A, that logically signals that the action described in the sentence, the researchers theorizing that the dish was named for its effect on diners, that is a result or consequence of the previous observation about the dish having a calming effect. Now, when you get to the questions that come last in every module, they come after the transition words. Like number 31, you will always notice that there are these bullet points. I call them student note questions because every time we're looking at a student's notes, that's what these bullet points are. A student has taken the following notes. Don't ever start by reading the notes because you'll end up wasting a lot of unnecessary time. What I want you to do is look at your question. Starting here, the student wants to emphasize a difference. So what are we looking for? A difference between baking soda and baking powder. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? This is pretty much the same on all these student note questions, or a version of that. So what I really want to pay attention to is what I highlighted here. All I'm looking for is which one of these 4 shows a difference between baking soda and baking powder. If I look at A, it says to make batters rise, bakers use chemical leavening agents such as baking soda and baking powder. That does not tell me a difference. B, baking soda and baking powder are chemical leavening agents that when mixed with other ingredients cause carbon dioxide to be released within a batter. That tells me how they're the same, not how they're different. C, baking soda is pure sodium bicarbonate and honey is a type of acidic ingredient. This one does not talk about baking powder. D, to produce carbon dioxide within a liquid batter, baking soda needs to be mixed with an acidic ingredient, whereas baking powder does not. So that tells me the difference between the two. So I'm confident that my answer is D, and I never even had to look at the student notes in this particular question. And oftentimes you won't have to. So let's look at question 32. Again, I'm going to not focus on the bullet points right now. These are the student notes. I'm going to look in the question for what exactly I'm looking for out of these answer choices. The student wants to describe unwoven light to an audience unfamiliar with Sue Sunny Park. So it needs to talk to us about unwoven light and who is Sue Sunny Park. So it needs to include both of those in order to be my correct answer. So I'm going to go ahead and start looking at my answer choices. A says Park's 2013 installment Unwoven Light, which included a chain link fence and iridescent tiles made from plexiglass, featured light as its primary medium of expression. This doesn't tell me anything about Sue Sunny Park. So yes, it talks about unwoven light. We want an audience that's unfamiliar with Sue Sunny Park, and this one would not help me with that. B, Korean American American light artist Sue Sunny Park created unwoven light in 2013. Okay, that's great, but it does not describe unwoven light. So there it tells us about the artist, but not the artwork. C, the chain link fence in Sue Sunny Park's unwoven light was fitted with tiles made from iridescent plexiglass. Again, gives us information about unwoven light, but does not tell us about Sue Sunny Park. D, in unwoven light, a 2013 work. Okay, so it's telling me what unwoven light is. It's a 2013 work by Korean American artist Sue Sunny Park. So it's telling me who Sue Sunny Park is. Light formed colorful prisms as it passed through a fence park had fitted with iridescent tiles. So it tells us about the project, the artwork, and it tells us about the artist. So D is the only logical answer. Number 33. Again, bullet points, don't need to read those. Remember, 32, we didn't have to go up there and read any of those to find the answer. The student wants to represent Tan's research to an audience unfamiliar with Angkor Wat. So we want to present Tan's research, but it has to also give us information about Angkor Wat because it says he wants to present it to an audience unfamiliar with Angkor Wat. So let's see. A, Tan photographed Angkor Wat's plaster walls and then applied decorrelation stretch analysis to the photographs. That doesn't really tell me anything about Angkor Wat. B, decorrelation stretch analysis is a novel digital imaging technique that Tan used to enhance the contrast between colors in a photograph. That tells me a lot about the process, but it does not give me any information about Angkor Wat. I'm looking at C now. Using a novel digital imaging technique, Tan revealed hundreds of images hidden on the walls of Angkor Wat, a Cambodian temple. This one tells me what Angkor Wat is. D, built to honor a Hindu god before becoming a Buddhist temple, Cambodia's Angkor Wat concealed hundreds of images on its plaster walls. That does not tell me anything about Tan's research. So we want to make sure we look here. C had Tan's research, and it tells us about what Angkor Wat is. So C is our
How did you do on practice test 4? Well, what are you waiting for? What do you do next? Go to practice test 5. Get out a copy of it, go to my next video, and watch the complete walkthrough on practice test 5. So you know how to answer every single one of those questions, the thought process behind it, and how to arrive at the right answer.